Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Debbie Guy-Geesh, and welcome to my live streaming show, Get Real with Revenue Marketing. I'd like to welcome our guest today. I'm super excited. Ken Robinson, who is the CMO at NetDocuments, and Ken is what I call a pioneer, and he is also a serial revenue marketer. So I thought it would be great to have him on the show today, so that we can just talk about, what has revenue marketing meant to him throughout his career. But welcome to the show, Ken. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Debbie, thanks so much. I really appreciate that introduction. And it's as we were catching up just before we went live, it's wonderful to see you again, and so much success on both the show and the work that you have been doing across the communities here. It's been wonderful to see the trajectory of the Pettowitz Group and your own professional success. So it's just awesome to see you again. So Ken Robinson, as Debbie had introduced me, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for NetDocuments. We work in the legal tech space. Revenue marketing for me is it really harkens back to the early days. Not to anchor the term or concepts to a vendor, but it was really for me it started with Marketo and kind of the coining of that term, or at least starting to shape the concept of thinking about marketing and marketing's contributions back to the business through the optic of revenue and ROI. And so that that kind of got me moving along this path. In part, as a little bit of background, I have degrees in finance, and so as I shifted from finance into marketing, and we started having conversation about marketing's impact on the business, I always felt like we kind of struggled a little bit to articulate. We're doing these things, and we've got these set of activities, but what's the ultimate result? And it was always kind of a tough way to articulate that. So
how many years can you say that you had more of a financial bent? Did you always bring that to the role of marketing?
That's a really good question. You're going to ask me to date myself at this point. I cut my teeth out of grad school when I was probably 26-ish, and I worked in finance for a couple of years doing cost and revenue, and I had the good fortune of working with a wonderful marketing team, and position in marketing opened up, and I convinced them to give me a shot. And so to work in that capacity. So I would think about it from a revenue perspective, but as I moved through subsequent positions, that idea of connecting revenue back to marketing didn't quite surface. It was one of those things that I was working for a company called Market Tools, which ultimately was bought by SurveyMonkey, and we found ourselves in a position where we had to think about the platform of choice. And this was the early days of Marketo. I think I was probably one of the first 50 clients of those guys. And so it was sort of that thinking and that messaging and thematic.
And remember, I didn't invent the term revenue marketing until 2010, 2011. So if it was prior to that, it would not have, it wouldn't have been there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I use your phraseology as an overlay and a short stroke to a lot of those general concepts, and that you have to think about not as marketing not being arts and crafts, but the work and the good efforts that you put forward, you have to be able to connect that back to the impact.
That is so true. And just so you know, remember this, Ken? Ken was in my first book, Rise of the Revenue Marketer. And even back then, Ken had this formula. He had this packaged approach. Whenever he would come into an organization as the CMO, he knew exactly what he wanted to do. And in the early days, what was so cool about what Ken was able to do is he could come in and set the vision with the executives for not only why marketing needed to change, but also why and how marketing was actually going to do that. Remember, we talked about that. I think we talked about that in this first book. I mean, and we would talk about how at the time, nobody had that much of a vision. They knew something was changing, but they really didn't have a vision for it. And they certainly didn't have a playbook for it. And Ken, that's what he talks about in this book, is how he always brought that playbook approach. And so, Ken, when we met, which is probably, I don't know, a dozen years ago, it's been a while. And Ken and I are good friends. We've known each other for a long time. He lives out on the West Coast, and I live on the East Coast. But I remember, when you and I met and we started talking about revenue marketing, and it was something that you were already doing, whether it had a name or not. And so when you think about being a revenue marketer, how has applying those principles helped you as a CMO?
Thinking about the principles around revenue marketing is candidly, it's helped me tremendously. And I think as we've moved through the years, we've moved through the 12 years that we've been together, and you think about the way that organizations today, whether it's B2B or B2C, are thinking about these concepts. They're looking for marketers that can come in and articulate. And I always call it from cash to cash, right? So marketing is typically afforded, a bucket of money to make investments, and they got to put those investments into the marketplace. And then what's the sort of return that they're going to get on the back end of that? And I think as I've talked to my contemporaries, as we've talked to organizations that are looking for leaders that kind of bring this mentality to the table today, it's been absolutely instrumental in being able to articulate a vision for how are we taking the money that afforded to us as a marketing team, moving that through the funnel, how are we providing pipeline coverage, what is that going to mean to bookings, and then how are we going to measure ROI? And it's materially shifted the conversation. As you can't, it depends on your role, and I'll speak from my own position. I can't center myself just around metrics, per se. That is a cornerstone of what I bring to the table, but I also think it's important to be, as you grow your career, to have, kind of exposure in some ways to multiple disciplines within marketing. But as I think about, and just in the course of my day today, I've done, as probably many of us have, probably upwards of 7 or 8 video calls. Probably better than 50% of my calls today. You do
it with a drink in your hand. I mean, that's the
difference. You get the benefit of 3 hours on me. So I just have started this. A lot of the conversations that I'm having today, the meaningful conversations that we're having about moving the business forward, especially getting into a new calendar year, we've got a new budget, we've got new targets, have actually, they've centered on how are we moving from cash to cash. We've built a really bit of a sophisticated financial model. We've got the expenses, those are tied to by channel conversion rates, deal velocity, deal cycle. And all those differ by channel. And what does that lead to MQLs and SQLs and pipeline from a dollar perspective? What's the coverage? What do we think that's going to lead to in terms of deal, and what's going to be the resulting ARR? And we have that by ARR.
And I just want to say that for everybody listening, Ken sounds like a VP of sales. Listen to what he just said. The pipeline, the funnel, the average deal size, the average deal close. I mean, that's what great revenue marketers can do. They understand the sales process in their organizations, and that's one of the reasons why Ken has been so successful throughout his career, is because he creates these great relationships with sales, and then he moves to affect sales. So I just wanted to stop and let everybody know what they just heard is exactly the way that they need to be talking.
Yeah, and let me shift gears ever so slightly, and that is part of the way that I found success going into an organization. In a lot of organizations, one of the challenges that marketers at many different levels face is that proverbial division between sales and marketing. And it's the S&M. Do I get credit? Do I not get credit? How do you start to rationalize that? And so what I've just riffed on in my own terms was that common language. Mm-hmm. That's the language that it's the language that I have with my demand gen team. It's the language that I'm having with marketing operations. It's the language and the dialogue that we have with the vice presidents of sales, my CRO, and I literally was just coming off a one-on-one with the CEO. Yep. And this was what we had been talking about. And that's establishing that common language. It's not to suggest that when we get into other areas of marketing that we're not getting wonky, clicks and open rates and subscribes and unsubscribes and like all the things that we kind of as marketers think about. But there's an audience, which is sales, and let's not forget what we would term aftermarket, current clients, and that kind of that cross-sell opportunity, because marketing doesn't stop at the point that the sale is made. Marketing continues thereafter. And there's an ever so slightly different language we use with those guys, but it has to be driven with a common language that makes sense to sales, not likes and follows.
And Ken has done this in every single company that he's worked with for as long as I have known him. As a matter of fact, in my next book, which you guys have seen, From Backroom to Boardroom, Ken's in this book too, and he gave a great little mini case study around, you know, how marketing needs to become an advocate for, a peer of, and they need to be creating a revenue relationship together. And so that's something that I see you doing in every single company that you come into, Ken. And when you come into a company, what does the marketing team think about that? What do you have to do to convince them to get on board?
Well, I fundamentally, my heart and soul, I'm probably a builder, you know, and an architect. So there's certain roles that, as I've shifted from one position to the next, that appeal to me a little bit more. And I like to go in and either pivot, build new, you know, or in some ways kind of re-architect. And so in part, you know, some of that success is establishing not only the common language with sales, but ensuring that the folks that are on the team that are in these key roles like ops and demand gen, and really, you know, kind of across the team at varying levels of detail, understand that common language. The other part of it is I come in first week, I'm telling you, as a marketing team, we were signing up for a marketing quota. So, you know, we want to put a stake in the ground and be held accountable for a certain percentage of revenue, and as you work your way back up the funnel, a certain percentage of pipeline. Have
you found, Ken, you know, when you think about the last 4 companies that you have worked with, have you found that when you go into new companies now, that you have a marketing team that is more excited about taking on a quota, or do you still find that you have to do a lot of change management?
That's, you know, it's a really good question. I've been fortunate to bring along some of the folks I've worked with in the past. So it's
smart man.
DNA, the DNA is woven into it.
Yep.
In cases where I might be inheriting somebody, I find a lot of times, if the role I might be going into, these might be unfamiliar concepts from an execution or operational standpoint, but from an intellectual and a curiosity standpoint, that's where they want to go, and that's where they want to move to. Mm-hmm. So really, you know, that understanding, alignment with sales goals, signing up for a quota, transparency and open communication in terms of what's working and what's not working, and even transparency in terms of the data.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then using that common language, if we can get those 3 principles centered and anchored with the team that I inherit or that we onboard new and with sales, that creates a good foundation for success. There's a lot of work in front. You know, I always think about building out something new from a people, a program, a process, and a technology perspective. And there's a lot that gets filled in that kind of 2x2 matrix. But I think the people that want to really, you know, thrive in this new area of revenue marketing subscribe to that, and they want to be held accountable.
Yeah. They should. You know, a few years ago, I started building out a course. I didn't finish it, but you know, this marketing, not understanding sales, you know, back in the early days, you know, 10, 12 years ago, Ken, when you and I first met, we were talking about that then. Well, we're still talking about that. There are still way too many marketing organizations that they really don't understand how to work with sales, nor do they have a good structure for working with sales, nor do they understand why they need to understand sales even more. I started putting together a class with, I am doing a 13-module revenue marketing certification course that's coming out this fall. And 2 of the modules are all about getting to know sales. So if marketing doesn't understand the sales process, if they don't understand the sales organization, if they don't understand how they're compensated, if they don't understand how a deal works and what it takes to bring in a deal, then how can they be a good partner to the sales organization? So how do you teach marketing about sales?
That's a really it's a really good question. I'm going to fall on my sword and say I don't know that I look when I look to build the team and I look to fill in that 2x2 with the people thing. I look for people that have an interest, an intellectual curiosity, and kind of an aptitude to understand that. And part of that is the connective tissue back to some of the things I just mentioned, right? That's alignment with sales goals. It's wanting to make sure that as marketing is doing X, sales is transacting Y, we see a result in Z. And it's kind of that level of connective tissue. There's a connective language. So in many cases, if we can create the right framework, some of that happens organically. I don't necessarily have to find myself in a position to teach marketers to appreciate sales. And in part, I think it's because of the advancements that we've made around a lot of the topics that we've talked about, which is, revenue marketing. I think they want to understand that. And if they don't, I don't know that they're going to necessarily be successful in some of these roles.
And you model the behavior. I mean, that's the other really big difference. You model the behavior, and because you always come in with a playbook, you put them into situations where they can learn and they can experience, right? And that's how you change a marketing organization to understand sales and really become a partner in revenue. One of the terms that we're playing around with these days is this notion of quote unquote digital revenue, right? Because so much selling is happening in the digital world, whether it's through online relationships or whatever that is. And one of the things that I say about digital revenue is it is fully a team sport. The times of hiring a bunch of feet on the street are gone. That's bye-bye, right? So it really takes marketing and sales together, working together in this digital world to really make that impact on revenue. And so, we talked a little bit about how marketing approaches that and how they come to the table. What kind of changes have you seen on the sales side?
It's I don't know if this is maybe PC. It's almost like taking a starving man to the buffet.
Yeah.
Because in many cases, in many organizations, even today, given the advances we've seen in technology and thinking and thought leadership, and certainly you've been at the forefront of that. You go into many organizations and there, a lot of guys, a lot of ladies, teams, if you will, are still working from that legacy position of sales and marketing us and them. And I think you come in if you can approach this as a partnership, and marketing is not a service organization. I think you start to build that trust. I always tell my team that credibility and trust is earned. It's not given. And I think if you can demonstrate some of these principles, again, going back to alignment around goals, transparency in terms of what's working and not working, using that common language, then I think you start to build those relationships. And I think the other note, and I'm reflecting on my own organization, we've talked a lot about sales, but obviously, sales team organizations take on, it's a fingerprint for the organization. You've got BDRs, you got account executives. In our organization, as we think about marketing's coverage, kind of quota coverage, like our goals, right? There's a percentage of that. There's a certain percentage that's aligned with partnerships. And for many organizations, whether they're ISVs or implementation partners or the like, and then you've got what we term self-gen, like how much is being done through the proverbial cold calling. Really making sure that marketing is thinking about that mix in a holistic perspective. Sometimes the percentage coverage changes, but I think marketing's got an impact on a lot of that. Marketing is doing what it's doing from revenue marketing. We are providing a lot of support, a lot of thinking from the demand gen perspective and content perspective to our partner community. And then I think on the self-gen side of things, it was the proverbial air cover. They will be effective, but we can make them incrementally effective in terms of what we're doing. And so, if I look at the expansion of my team, demand gen or kind of revenue marketing, but it gets out into content and corporate marketing. My team has to work in concert across the organization, both for new logo acquisition and aftermarket sales. So I think we've got a big impact on the overall business.
what do you think, has COVID had any impact on the perceived importance of marketing to the organization? Have you seen anything like that?
The first visceral reaction to it is direct mail has taken on a completely new dimension. If we back up a handful of years, I don't know, different types of direct mail campaigns, certainly effective. There's a lot of really just fantastic examples out there, but with everyone working for their home office, it's, people I think appreciate a degree of personalization, to, getting something, whether it's electronically or dimensional mailer, is sort of appreciated. And so I think companies that are thoughtful about their approach, the personalization about the approach, there's certainly some very good tools out there, have helped. Most folks don't want yet one more video call. They're not looking to take down one more email because the day has been elongated. It's concept of that. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
I do definitely change the dynamics of it. But in our own business, given the audience that we sell into direct mail, as a contributor at a channel level, it's certainly increased. So that's one of the things that we've kind of taken away from that.
All right. So last question. So you've been at this game for a long time, Mr. Robinson. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know today?
I may go a fraction off script from revenue marketing. And the only thing I think it was imparted upon me by one of my CEOs a couple of companies back, and that's the importance of servant leadership in these roles. Servant leadership for me means, I use the analogy, I stand at the front of the boat and make sure that as we are thinking about the company goals and how that gets transacted down and what's that connective tissue to the marketing goals and objectives, and then how does that get moved down into kind of the frontline employees, making sure that they understand where it is that we're going. And certainly if campaigns go a little bit sideways and programs go a little bit sideways, I usually sort of stand in front and I'm the one that takes the rotten fruits and vegetables. But when things are going very well, I stand at the back of the boat. And I think it's the sunshine that should come down on the employees' faces for all the good work that they're putting forward, and just making sure that we're kind of connecting the dots to the good work that we're doing, and how does it accrue back to those higher level goals. The things that we've talked about here in terms of alignment with sales and making sure that marketing is a partner in the business for customers, for sales is hugely important. Make sure that transparency, using that common language, those are all things that I've kind of picked up as sort of nuggets along the way. But I think one of the things, at least at this point in my career, that's if I had this knowledge before, it would probably have helped me be a leader. Is that kind of servant leadership. The other thing is transparency. I don't know that I'm
Ken?
Is transparency. I share openly to some level. Obviously, there's some things that we need to hold in confidence, but I share, what am I working on? What troubles do I have? Mm-hmm. What challenges am I facing? And use the team as sounding boards and inputs for what it is I'm doing. I always say, if I'm the only person that's putting the ideas up on the whiteboard, in one of these ideation sessions, it's going to be a relatively short meeting. So I know that's a hair off the topic of.
I love it. No, that's it. That's exactly what I wanted. And the whole notion of servant leadership, I think, is more pertinent today than it ever has been, because one of the things that we've seen, during COVID and all the stress that it has created on businesses and on marketing teams, is this real desire to get rid of all the crap, right? And just be authentic with people. That's what people want, quit playing games, quit playing corporate ball, just be authentic with people. And that is certainly a tenet of being a servant leader. And then you're right. Transparency is so important. And I always share with people about, why a marketing team needs to be transparent in what they're doing, because quite often marketing is perceived as they go off in this hole and they do a bunch of stuff and they scurry around, but nobody knows what they're doing, right? Unlike a marketing team where every person, unlike a sales team where every salesperson is walking around with a big old sign on their back saying, I have to meet quota, and everybody and their brother knows exactly where every single salesperson is on attaining that quota. So it really has to do with accountability. But no, I love that, Ken. The whole notion of servant leadership, I think, is incredibly important right now. There's certainly a time for different types of leadership. And I know that you have been a servant leader for quite some time because we've talked about that. But again, it's more important today than ever before. And then, of course, transparency. So anyway, well, my friend, it has been wonderful to talk to you today. Cheers. Cheers. Yep.
Here's the success in 2021. Health and happiness.
Health and happiness in 2021.